What happens when the world of a powerful woman collides with that of a simple countryman? Imagine a demanding millionaire, accustomed to living among the elite, facing a modest farmer for the first time in the big city. What seemed like a minor detail, such as the smell of animals on a plane, triggers a series of events that, in just 2 days, will turn their lives upside down. This unlikely encounter between Helena Green, a socialite with no patience for the annoyances of simple folks, and John Brown, a 72-year-old man with a sincere soul, will test the true meaning of dignity, respect, and, most importantly, humility. And what seemed like an unjustified humiliation will give way to something no one could have predicted. John Brown never imagined that the flight of his life would take him so far. At 72 years old, the simple and dedicated farmer from the small town of Hillsborough, Texas, was finally about to realize a dream he had carried for decades: visiting New York City. For most people, a trip to the airport and then to the city center might not seem like a big deal. But for John, it was something unusual, far from his rural universe. For the first time, he was trading dirt roads and cornfields for asphalt and skyscrapers. He had never flown before, never experienced the frantic rush of airports, or the immense shine of luxury stores with displays full of items he barely knew the names of. As he stepped out of the taxi that took him to LaGuardia Airport, his head spun with the novelty. The lights of the stores reflected in his curious eyes. The sounds of hurried people echoed around him, and the grandeur of the place made John feel even smaller than he really was. His hands, calloused from hard work on the farm, still carried the smell of the earth he cultivated, but they were not hands made for the fine goods circulating there. His goal was clear. He came to the city looking for new suppliers and, who knows, opportunities he could take back to his farm. But the feeling of being out of his usual environment brought a constant restlessness. John was fascinated, but the fear of making mistakes, of being uncomfortable, of seeming out of place, was also there. He realized how the world, which always seemed too big from where he lived, now looked terrifying up close. Not knowing exactly what to do with the disconcerting look of disapproval he felt from some people, he decided to move forward. After all, he came here to learn, so he would have to get used to being in the spotlight. While he tried to find the line for boarding, exchanging hurried glances with other passengers, and trying to arrange himself to find his best posture, that's when she appeared. Helena Green entered the airport with the grace and poise of someone accustomed to status, and her gaze immediately captured John's scene. For her, everything around seemed to accommodate to serve her. She walked confidently, her high heels almost echoing in the vast terminal, the elegance of her high-end attire drawing attention, without her making any effort for it to happen. Around her, everyone seemed to move away in respect or fear. The aura of power she radiated was palpable, and her awareness of being a high-class woman who did not accept challenges from the simple world was evident. Helena was on a personal mission. After a business meeting, she decided to spend the rest of the day dealing with personal matters, all done her way. She felt no need to be courteous to those who strayed from what she considered the best standard. This included John. She did not yet know who he was, but when she met his gaze, she felt an instant discomfort. The man in front of her, whose simple clothes contrasted with the ostentation of the airport, emanated something completely different from what she was used to. She wrinkled her nose. The smell. The smell. Her expression changed in seconds, and it was impossible to hide her irritation. It was unbearable. The breath of the earth, the odor of the farm animals that, unintentionally, clung to John's body, gave the impression that he belonged to another world, a dirty, uncomfortable world, unworthy of such a refined public space. "I can't breathe with this here. This man needs to leave," said Helena, in a loud enough tone to attract attention. Her gaze cut through the line of passengers around her and found the face of a flight attendant who already knew her, recognizing the authority the woman imposed with each word. The flight attendant, visibly uncomfortable with the command, hesitated, But Helena insisted. "I pay for quality service. I can't allow this lack of hygiene to affect me this way. Remove this man from my sight." John, not yet understanding what was happening, was surprised by the sudden intervention. He just looked at her, feeling suddenly inferior. It was not new to feel that some people's lives were far from his reality, but that kind of attack, so ruthless, so direct, was something he did not expect in the place where he finally felt so small and out of place. When the flight attendant approached, offering him a new seat, he still tried to protest. "But I already paid. What happened?" "It's because of your smell," the flight attendant replied in a low voice, as if apologizing. John accepted the reassignment without more words. He walked to the boarding area with a heavy heart, hearing whispers around him, feeling watched and deep down, completely out of place. Little did he know, however, that his mere presence, of someone with little pomp, but with invisible humility and value to many, was about to become a story he could never imagine. At the moment, he just felt humiliated, anguished, and as lost as a fish out of water. But around him, the looks, the judgments, passed by the true importance of what he represented. And this, soon, would begin to change forever. The minutes seemed endless for John. The plane cut through the sky like an arrow, taking him to a city that represented everything he did not know. From the moment he entered the cramped economy class cabin, something in the environment made him feel completely out of place. While other passengers occupied their seats with an almost arrogant confidence, he sat with a lost look, trying at the same time to adapt to such a modern and complex setting. Every smell, every new sound reminded him of his distant world. The peaceful mornings in the countryside, the smell of wet earth after the rain, and the relaxing sound of animals. He thought of his home, the quiet days taking care of the crops and plants, the coffee and chats with friends in the small village in Texas. Being there, on a plane flying over New York City, was a surreal experience, but also loaded with discomfort. John felt like an intruder, a man of few words in the middle of a concrete jungle, where everyone seemed busy with what the city had to offer: business, luxury, connections, and status. Something seemed missing in that place. And this feeling of disconnection tortured him more and more, but he had no time to reflect much. He was determined to achieve his goal, negotiate good seeds, increase his harvest, and bring new perspectives from a world beyond his own. Still immersed in reflection, the memory of Helena invaded his mind. The arrogant look, the disdain stamped on her face when she realized he did not belong to those airs. "This man smells like animals. He has to leave," she said with frightening coldness. Those words hurt him deeply, but John did not let them take over his being. He knew it made no sense to react to a world that seemed to operate with rules so different from his own. He knew that his smell of earth and animals was, in essence, the mark of his life. His hard work in the field could not be mistaken for something dirty or unpleasant. It was the smell of life, of creation. But he understood, at that moment, that there were worlds where this perception had no place. Sitting in his cramped seat, he looked around and felt invisible. To the people around, he was just another country bumpkin, a simple guy who threw himself into the sophisticated universe without any pretense of belonging. The airplane's air conditioning fan did not do justice to the heat and psychological discomfort he experienced. He turned from side to side, uncomfortable, trying not to get more involved with what was happening around him. He wanted to enjoy the trip. He wanted to learn, change his life, maybe even learn something new about himself. But deep down, every look he received made him question his own worth. The experience was further intensified by the contrast he observed in the expressions of the other passengers. Quick, almost impersonal glances that hardly made any difference when the first-class aircraft with their seats covered in expensive fabrics crossed his vision. And while he struggled not to focus his mind on his own insignificance, he remembered the simplest and most genuine moments of his life, the joys of the countryside. In one of those moments when he was there, looking out the window, reflecting on his position in the world and the weight of what had happened, something unexpected began to stir the fate that was about to happen. What he felt was a disconcerting experience would soon stop being a chapter of emotional suffering and become one of the most viral stories of his life. In a few days, John, the figure who seemed to be the opposite of the modern and powerful city of New York, would see his life begin to be transformed in ways he could never imagine. No matter how much he tried to focus on his final destination, the weight of humiliation remained, not because of a lack of dignity, but because of the stark disparity between his rural world and the arrogance he encountered in airports and airplanes. John was a man of roots, a man of the land who had always known that genuine effort to provide for his family was worth more than any jewel. But at the same time, deep down, he never felt inferior to the imposing structures of big cities, and external confrontations only reinforced his purpose. The truth about his own strength was hidden in his displays of humility, his longevity in the field, and the value not given by the immeasurable wealth of some wealthy people. For him, growing in his humility was worth more than flaunting properties in the capital. His connection with the land was purer than any relationship with the financial market. Arriving in New York City, the setting of modern business and urbanity, cruelly distant from the hills and trails of his home, would require a confrontation not only of cultures, but of his own acceptance. How was he now a man more on the margins than a visionary? He who built legacies with simple hands, but of rare quality. He who had in his body the time of a calm world, but always desirous of expansion within the limits of his possible life. But all this was just the first window into the transformation that was to come. The truth was now coming from an inexplicable encounter in his first urban confrontation with the arrogance of high society. The contrast between his genuine simplicities and what Helena tried to deny as disdain. The plane touched down in New York City with a soft thud, barely interrupting John's thoughts. The farmer, with his simple and striking manner, disembarked from his first international flight. Although the journey had been brief, the feeling of being in another world was overwhelming. On one side, the green horizons and fields of Texas. On the other, a concrete jungle called New York. Now, he walked with his worn-out suitcase among the hurried passengers, feeling more lost than ever. As the terminal filled with elegant people in impeccable suits, women in high heels, and designer clothes, John couldn't avoid feeling uncomfortable and out of place. The hurried faces, the firm steps, and even the soft smell of perfumes that took over the environment made him more nervous. He, who came from the countryside, with feet soaked in the earth and hands calloused by daily labor, was now facing a completely new world. Everything there seemed very distant, but he couldn't allow himself to hesitate. While walking through the busy arrivals area, he thought about everything he should do in New York. His mission was not simple. He knew that. He wanted to expand the business of his small farm, get good prices for the seeds, and maybe return with a promising contract to improve his harvest. The feeling of being there, of having ventured so much for a land where he did not belong, generated both excitement and a twinge of fear. But there was something more that he didn't yet know. That courageous gesture of venturing into the big city would begin to change his life in unimaginable ways. John's thoughts were interrupted by a call on his cell phone, vibrating in his pocket. It was Peter, his eldest son, with a tone that balanced impatience and excitement. "Dad, have you arrived? Are you okay? Where are you?" Peter said quickly, almost impatiently, but filled with the concern he felt for the distance between them. After all, he was always in contact with the family business, and the city was not just another place to expand his borders. It was an opportunity to bring something more, to keep alive the heritage that his father built and didn't even know its real importance. The contrast between father and son seemed inevitable. Peter, young, modern, full of energy, contrasted with the quietness of John, a man of principles who accepted the simple routine of his rural life. However, the two shared a fundamental philosophy about what hard work and respect for roots meant. "I'm here, son," John replied, trying to keep a calm tone despite his nervousness. Peter immediately explained where to find him in the terminal. John, with his worn-out suitcase, crossed another corridor and suddenly spotted his son. Peter was the perfect image of a future that John had helped build without knowing. That man, with his designer clothes and confident demeanor, represented everything he had never sought, but now needed to understand. As they greeted each other, the handshake between father and son was full of unspoken feelings. For John, a vast field of doubts still hung over everything he was experiencing. The big city didn't seem to be his home, but he felt that a transition was slowly taking shape, and his future needed to be carefully tread there. Let's have some fun with the readers in the comments. Type love if you've made it this far. Now, let's get back to the story. Despite the discomfort and uncertainty, John remained firm. Peter led him to a private room where they began to talk about the future. At that moment, something hidden was about to be revealed. Events began to unfold at a pace John couldn't keep up with. Peter, more than just his son, was the main link in a growing network of businesses that connected various families and companies in a world that was still very distant from John's simple, rural vision. He knew that his father, although with vast knowledge in agriculture and a certain kind of wisdom, had no idea of the magnitude of his own importance. The seeds that John cultivated on the farm were of rare quality, recognized for their extraordinary results. Many of his innovations in harvesting processes were, in reality, altering the agricultural landscape of various regions. Peter was already being sought after by investors and businessmen from big cities, who saw in his father a great asset in the field. John, however, had not yet understood how far his legacy could go. For him, life was reduced to the waiting time between harvests and the constant effort to keep the property running. But his knowledge, unbeknownst to him, was being discussed at big business tables. Helena Green, on the other hand, with all her arrogance and preconceived notions about who could or could not be worthy of a universe of luxury and glory, was determined to diminish everything that came close to her reach. After the confrontation at the airport, she couldn't forget about John, and no matter how much she tried to divert her mind from it, she felt restless. 3 days later, she made a decision that would change the course of her story, and John's. Helena contacted Peter directly, with a clear objective to acquire the farm that belonged to John, and thus consolidate the empire she wanted to expand. She offered a generous amount, but was frustrated when Peter, with a calm smile, refused to discuss the sale. Helena didn't know what to think, but felt even more challenged by this refusal. Something inside her told her there was much more behind that countryman than she imagined. From that refusal, John's most powerful secret was finally revealed. She was introduced to John, who, in practice, not only owned the farm, but an innovation and agricultural technology structure that few could imagine. He had inventions that would revolutionize the way farming was done in the entire country, an invaluable legacy full of dignity. But his true legacy was not just material. It was the seeds of wisdom and humility he carried with him. "This farm is not for sale," John said in a low but strong voice. "I work here with my soul, and here is not just a business." It was the moment of the first true lesson Helena received. Real value is not in the riches one can buy, but in the wisdom one carries. It was necessary to listen, understand, and respect before making any judgment. When faced with John's serene gaze and the contours of that farm where life had a different rhythm, Helena began to perceive the real value of what she had despised. Over time, she sought to get closer to the old farmer, willing to learn from him not only about his art of cultivating, but about what humanity and respect for others truly meant. John, with his infinite humility, accepted her questions, transforming that episode of disdain into an opportunity for mutual teaching and understanding. In that encounter that seemed to be just a friction, Helena discovered there was still much to learn. Their pasts, would now intertwine in an unexpected future, where nothing would be the same as before. Because in the end, what would remain was a truth that few people had understood until that moment. When you love the land, the future is built in the present. In the days following the confrontation, something beyond the expected began to happen. The initial friction between Helena Green and John Brown, dramatic as it was, gave way to something profoundly transformative, a series of encounters that slowly began to undo the prejudices that existed on both sides. If at first, Helena seemed determined to humiliate the simple countryman, the following days revealed aspects of her character that could not be ignored. Helena, a refined woman accustomed to the comforts of high society in Manhattan, had no idea that a simple visit to John's farm would so radically change the course of her life. To her, John was just another ignorant man with his calloused hands and humble way of living, something she couldn't associate with the idea of success or what she considered worthy of attention. But this portrait was slowly challenged. On several occasions, as he guided her through the fields of the farm and explained each crop, each plant, and each season, something began to grow inside Helena. She didn't expect to learn so quickly, or even to become interested in such a simple and unglamorous life. But things started to make sense in a way she never imagined. She began to understand the value of patience, observation, and the immense effort that rural life demands. It was hard to compare it to the world of big business and quick meetings in air-conditioned rooms, but John's lessons resonated more and more in her mind and heart. With each new conversation with the farmer, Helena found herself more involved, more curious about the mysteries of the land. Her initial questions about the value of agricultural practices began to give way to deeper questions about life, time, and what really mattered. She found herself learning resilience concepts that she had never applied in her own daily life. Helena knew that John's fields flourished because he cultivated patience, discipline, and respect for what nature demanded. And the most interesting thing was realizing that he didn't do it out of vanity or desire for recognition. John did it because it was the essence of his existence, something intrinsic to his life journey. It was an almost strange feeling for Helena to surrender to the lessons of this simple man she had ignored at first. She, accustomed to the artificial shine of the big city, was now beginning to be enchanted by the genuine way he respected life and the world around him. The farm was not just a place of hard work. For her, it began to be a temple of learning not only about planting but about human beings and how to live more authentically. Between bites of rice, John shared secrets that had gone unnoticed, even in her best business books. The secret was, in the end, in the most fundamental basis of all, the simple act of giving. One day, while they were walking along a trail that cut through a newly cultivated area, Helena asked more genuinely than she could have imagined, "John, how do you manage to have so much focus and patience? Look at everything you do with your own hands. The world out there can't be that simple." John observed her for a moment, with the serene eyes of someone who had always believed in the answers of nature. "You're right, Miss Helena. The world out there is not simple. But on the land, I learned that when you respect your time, your space, and your task, everything fits in the end. Look at this plantation. Each seed has its moment to sprout, and each one has its own trajectory. I don't force anything. I respect." At that moment, Helena found herself more lost in John's reasoning than she ever imagined allowing herself to be. There was something almost mystical in how he observed the world. For him, what seemed obvious to her, so hurried and concerned with the superficial details of society, was not the true answer to a successful life. While the financial market, in which Helena was an expert, focused on numbers and risky strategies, John thought of the land and human relationships as a game where patience and long-term construction prevailed. He knew that value was not in having the fastest life or being the most influential, but in respect and dedication to honest work and nature. As a spontaneous lesson, he guided her to a field where they were planting a new type of bean. "Here, If you understand the life of this plant, you'll begin to understand what I mean. You know, some seeds can take months to sprout, and some even more than a year. If I were impatient, I could waste my entire harvest. But by giving the correct time, everything settles at its own pace. Helena looked around, absorbed by the words and the experience. She was living in a completely new way. She understood, at that moment, the true meaning of respecting time, something she had never seriously considered in her own professional path. After all, her life had always been about taking control and managing things as quickly as possible. Her process, she now saw, always tried to speed things up, forcing growth that didn't respect the natural order of the cycle. Time passed, and gradually, an incredible transformation began to happen, not only in Helena, but in the way she saw her relationship with John. As simple as his life was, he had something that Helena never possessed: a sense of belonging, tranquility, and dignity with himself. He was not in a hurry. He simply existed with purpose and integrity. She began to spend more time on his farm, asking for tips and more lessons. She started to enjoy the simple routine, the deep dialogues, the laughter without masks. Even after the initial mistakes and difficulties, Helena was falling more in love with that field and its charming simplicity. It was then that she saw something in John that, in her urban and polished sphere, many would call a mystery. How such a simple man seemed so free and fulfilled, something she, surrounded by money and status, felt she had lost. John, by teaching her the subtleties of planting, made her learn, in a forceful way, how to take care of the things in her life that were weakening and neglected. The next morning, sitting next to him at the edge of the field, Helena asked one of the most surprising questions of her life. "John," she said, with a soft and thoughtful tone, "do you believe that I can still be part of this new phase you're building here? Can I learn more about these processes?" He looked at her with a light but deep smile. "Of course, Miss Helena. Life teaches each of us if we are willing to listen." This simple exchange, which initially was loaded with distrust and distance, now became the bond that forged not only a new path for Helena, but a new way of seeing herself in the world. She began to let go of her obsession with control and allowed herself to be taught by the one who had initially been a victim of her superficial judgment. There in the farm fields, Helena learned a fundamental lesson. More important than reaching the top of the social pyramid was the authenticity of the process. The weeks following Helena's encounter with John were marked by an intense and transformative process, not only for her, but also for how she saw the world. In those first days of coexistence, when she still didn't know exactly what to expect from that unusual exchange, what arose within Helena were conflicting feelings. On one hand, she felt attracted by John's simple and direct wisdom, which, although loaded with pain and sacrifices over the years, never seemed to be corrupted by the bitterness the world could be. On the other hand, she constantly tried to resist the feeling of vulnerability he awakened in her. Helena, until then accustomed to the stability of a life marked by luxury and relationships based on interests, did not know how to deal with the weight of the truth that John brought in his words. Feeling uncomfortable in the face of such humility was a natural reaction, but at the same time, disconcerting. For days in a row, she tried to justify to herself that everything he said was too simple to apply to her complex and polished world. However, as the days passed, a silent transformation occurred in her mind. She began to understand that true greatness was not found in the million-dollar contracts she enjoyed, but in the deep understanding of how small and everyday things, like cultivating the land, feeding the animals, and teaching others the strength of hard work, were capable of generating much more significant wealth. The first real turning point occurred in one of those moments of quiet observation that Helena had in the midst of daily work in John's field. During an afternoon, when she accompanied him to the coffee plantations, she observed the careful way he treated each plant, how he seemed to understand each nuance of their cultivation, each need of the trees. It wasn't just simple care for the land. There was a visible connection between the man and nature. And somehow, that simple farmer was more aligned with the cycle of life than anyone from the big city. It's amazing how you understand each plant, John. I heard that you've spent your life here and never let yourself be diverted from your goal. I'm not capable of doing that, of sticking to something for so long with such dedication, said Helena, finally breaking the silence. She wasn't just impressed, she was touched by an unsettling truth, that the greatest mysteries of life didn't need complicated formulas to be solved. John, in his simple manner, looked at her and calmly replied, "Nature never charges me for staying here taking care of it, Helena. It is patient, understand? It gives time, something we in the city can't always have. Here, it's more than working for survival. It's having the certainty that you did what was within your reach to improve that little corner of the world." Helena looked at the vast coffee field, with the sun setting slowly in the background, and for the first time, she felt the weight of that statement. The days in the city were so consumed by the need to meet external demands, while there, in Texas, what really mattered was doing things well in silence, without the distractions of modern society. In that moment, a feeling of humility washed over her. Helena realized that in her quest to maintain immense control over her life, what she had lost the most was the true connection with what was around her. It wasn't just the manual labor that John performed, but also the way he approached human relationships, based on honesty, simplicity, and a profound respect for the dignity of others. Everyone did their part in the world, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem to a hurried glance, and for John, that respect was the foundation of everything. What she really needed to learn was to understand others in their hearts, without worrying about judgments. In the following days, this sense of discovery continued to grow. Helena began to spend more time in the field with John. Even with the burden of her busy life and the business empire she managed, she now sought to find answers in each interaction she had. One afternoon beside him, they were building a fence for the animals when she asked, "John, I really don't understand. Why do you keep doing this every day, with life being so hard and tiring? Don't you feel you could be doing something more grand?" John looked with his serene expression, like someone who had gone through thousands of reflections on life and said, "Grand, Helena. What is grand to you? Tell me, when you planted something with your own hands, seeing it grow, have you truly reaped the vision of what was sown? There is no wealth that replaces this kind of fulfillment. The world looks at the great empires, but the most valuable fruits are born in small lands. You and I, we're learning with time, each in our own way." It was hard for Helena to admit that his words were starting to make sense. She didn't know what John's first harvest meant to him, but she now understood the symbolism of constant and patient work that could bloom from within, building a foundation of values not just of wealth, but of love for creation. She was beginning to see her stunning vision of greatness differently. She was realizing that the peace John possessed came from how he connected to his simple and honest work, but capable of transforming lives around him. And that wisdom was more valuable than any fortune she could have. This realization would touch Helena's core. Now her conflicts were no longer just about class differences or her past failures in terms of judgment. They became intertwined lessons, silent changes that would take shape in her actions and how she acted with the world. In the following days, she began to seek concrete ways to apply the principles of the field and the land to her world, without knowing that this would start a change in perspective that, beyond remedying her past behavior, would make her redefine what success was. And with that, she began to understand that the collaboration with John, as unexpected and disconcerting as it was being the true journey of learning and reconstruction of a new Helena. Over the following days, Helena gradually let go of the viewpoints that had always governed her life, those based on power, control, and, of course, material luxury, that could transform nothing, not even her feelings. As John and she continued their work in the field, the lessons he offered her, unlike the formal lessons she had acquired over the years, were silent but powerful. The field, with all its vastness and simplicity, gave Helena the opportunity to delve into deep reflection about herself, her purpose in life, and the choices she had made until then. With each visit, she felt increasingly distant from the person she had been in her city. Her gaze was no longer one of detachment and judgment, as if everything she did not understand had to be disregarded. On the contrary, she began to see with a keen sense the small truths in which she had lost herself over the years in search of success. Beside John, her understanding of the world seemed to expand like the earth under the fingers of a farmer. Her eyes began to seek the connection that exists between hard work, patience, and understanding who we are. For weeks, the routine she spent in the field was marked by the sweat of labor, dedication to daily tasks, and the long conversations they both had. John, in his quiet wisdom, shared his stories and teachings without haste. He never forced the words, but in each of them were the deepest concepts about the human being and what it means to live with purpose. He spoke of the land not as a commodity, but as a sacred good that demands respect, patience, and, above all, a deep understanding that it does not belong to anyone, but that all living beings are part of its great cycle. That was what made his work special. More than just feeding, he became part of something that transcended the most immediate senses. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type dog if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. The biggest surprise for Helena was realizing how, beside John, she began to deconstruct the ingrained beliefs she had about life and success. As much as she was constantly moving, chasing new investments and perfection, the work in the field brought her something she had never experienced: a sense of peace and satisfaction. When she watched him early in the morning, planting and irrigating the coffee field, she saw in John something beyond a simple farmer. She saw a man who had become immune to the pride of opulence and had given himself body and soul to the simple and primordial task of caring for the life that manifested around him. When John explained to her how each coffee seed had a story and how he had learned over the years to identify the signs of nature to adjust the planting according to the rhythms of the climate, Helena understood the power that small daily actions could have on a great work, without haste, without anxiety. That natural cycle of sowing and harvesting, teaching and learning reflected a deeper life cycle, where patience became a vital virtue for any true transformation to occur. In the following months, the change in Helena was not only internal, but also visible in her way of leading. She spent more time observing her team, listening to ideas, taking into account not only the economic data, but also the impact of choices on the lives of the people around her. Instead of investing only in large commercial partnerships, she began to engage in projects that benefited the local community, especially those people closer to the field, such as the farm workers she had previously viewed in a cold and distant manner. John, once again, showed her the way to see wealth in small gestures, in shared learnings, and above all, in exchange. With him, she began to understand that no one grows without humility, without recognizing their own failures, and without learning from those who, though simple, have something profound to teach. It was also during these months of transformation that Helena began to realize, for the first time, the great value of the lessons she could pass on to her children. When she spoke with Peter about the new perspective she had, he noticed the radical change in her gaze. Instead of focusing on promises of financial future, material security, and social status, she now began to teach him the values of patience, the permission to learn from mistakes, and respect for work. This change was felt not only by Peter, but by the whole family. Helena, in turn, began to adopt a more contemplative, more silent posture, reflecting on the legacy she wanted to leave for her children. Before, her concerns were limited to material accumulation. Now, She wished to pass on to the next generations the importance of valuing what is not visible or easy to measure. Character, the legacy of understanding, wisdom, and patience, rather than the artificial shine that so often accompanies the desperate pursuit of personal achievements. That coffee field that, in the beginning, represented to her something exotic, almost irrational, now began to reflect values that she had never had the chance to develop in her fast-paced business world. In John, she not only recognized the wisdom acquired through rural life, but also began to admire his ability to transform everything he touched into something more human, more sincere. A gesture of touching the earth became a form of connection with the spirit itself. This was something Helena knew she needed to learn, to be part of the cycle instead of just dominating or controlling the processes. It was in a simple moment, as they both walked through one of the many coffee fields, that Helena had a somewhat crucial epiphany. She was sitting under a tree she frequently visited, looking at the horizon, reflecting in silence, when she said to John, "I would never have imagined that work in the field could teach me so much, John. I thought I had all the answers, but you showed me that I didn't, that I never did. You have a wisdom I never sought." John, in no hurry to respond, just smiled. He knew that Helena was finally beginning to understand the depth of her own journey. Even though her life had once been marked by the relentless pursuit of status, wealth, and recognition, Helena now understood that what she truly desired was a richer life, full of genuine experiences and authentic relationships. She realized that there was greatness hidden in humble choices, a type of greatness not showcased by camera flashes or private jets, but by how others feel when they are around someone who cares about what truly matters. She had taken a step back and allowed herself to learn in a different way. A step back that now indicated a step forward to a richer, truer, and more generous version of herself. Helena never imagined that the lessons from the field would change the course of her life, but she was ready to see them reflect in how she would establish herself in the future. With more gratitude, respect, and humility, knowing that true greatness is measured by the heart and the connections made along the journey. The big revelation of who John really was seemed to hit Helena like a lightning bolt. Throughout the time she had observed him from afar, she judged him according to her narrow worldview, not realizing that she was dealing with a man who not only built his own history, but had transformed what many would see as just a simple piece of land into an empire. Along their journey, a clash of opposing mentalities began to shape the contours of a great change, but until the moment of her real perception of John's value and complexities, things still seemed irreconcilable. When she discovered his name, his family's heritage, and the potential his farm represented in the American agricultural landscape, Helena's world crumbled before her own eyes. For her, that information wasn't just a shock. It was an infection of humility, an awareness of how her actions, impulsive and driven by her power, had been so unfounded and unfortunate. She hadn't just treated him arrogantly. She had used her position and influence to intimidate the man and seek to push him away, judging him by the first impression and ignoring everything he really represented. What she thought was a simple farmer with little to add to her life turned into a painful portrait of her own defects and personal failures, of her inability to connect with the true riches of life and the human being. Helena couldn't ignore the emotional turmoil that enveloped her as she assimilated the information that the man from the field was none other than John Brown, father of Peter Brown, the name behind a vast agricultural fortune and immense potential for the rural sector. She felt deep embarrassment as she realized how wrong she had been in treating him the way she had. Her silent anger, stemming from the layers of society that gave her some form of power, began to crumble as she felt the disconnection between her arrogance and the true wealth that humble man possessed. She felt the weight of her mistake. She had truly underestimated everything. And not only that, she had depreciated, diminished, disregarded someone who, to her eyes now, was a true legend and a living treasure. Those revelations swirled in her mind. Helena knew how much her arrogance had pushed him away, how much her rash actions on the plane were directly tied to the disdain she felt seeing a simple country bumpkin disturbing her moment, with that odor she considered vulgar. But now she began to realize that something much larger and more essential was hidden within the layers of that man. He carried the wisdom of generations of his land. Pure and real wisdom that transcended time. His mother and grandmother had dedicated their lives to farming, working the land, passing down values that created unbreakable roots. There was no vanity in that. There was genuineness, respect, persistence, and determination. The true story of what John Brown possessed was carefully told to her by his son, Peter. Thus, as she walked again through the corridors of the large mansion where she had grown accustomed to living, she plunged into a feeling of deep embarrassment, heavy enough to crush all the confidence she once had about who people were and what really made a difference. While she felt the weight of it, Peter presented the true legacy line of his father. That man from the field, seemingly devoid of artifice and extravagance, had in his trajectory the same impact as many of the wealthy and renowned figures. He had built with his own hands, based on perseverance, balance with nature, and, of course, a strategic growth vision. From farm to farm, his work was recognized not only by city dwellers, but by the giant entrepreneurs in America, who sought him out as a consultant. His story wasn't one of luxury and seduction by material goods, but a dedicated construction in the field, with respect for those behind the land and cattle. It wasn't a modern standard of wealth, but it was still one of the greatest legacies in the country's rural history. The pain, therefore, was felt by Helena because she now understood that she hadn't just humiliated any man. She had wronged someone who was undoubtedly an icon of the agricultural sector, a transformative link between her and Peter's parents, who, alongside John's power, had transformed the present and defined the future of the national and international food market. Moreover, she didn't know that the future farm of Peter was directly linked to the development of the community he lived in. This entire heritage would generate valuable opportunities for both small producers and investments beyond America's borders. Helena's downfall was vivid, sincere. The lights and cosmopolitan life had distorted her original vision of class and supremacy. She saw her decisions crumbling in the face of something as simple and honest as a life dedicated to transforming the field. She had built fame, but in those moments, she wanted to build, in fact, a sincere soul. It didn't take long for Helena to make a difficult decision, to approach John and sincerely ask for forgiveness. This conversation had to happen. Indeed, she didn't want to live any longer with the weight of that poorly written story, with the ingratitude for the field's wisdom overwhelming her with every visit she made with an impersonal smile. Helena sought John's presence, already knowing what he expected, a simple, direct, and straightforward apology. Before the man she had underestimated, her posture was one of humble submission. The man no longer carried that lost look in life's disadvantages. That field now showed him clearer paths, not only monetary, but of honor, dignity, and resilience. She finally made herself heard. "John, sir, I come to you to acknowledge my blindness. I was wrong. I was impulsive and unfair. All my life I treated the field as something secondary, something lesser. But now I understand. I understood that true wisdom lies precisely where eyes seldom look, among the calloused hands of a farmer who builds more than wealth, builds legacies. I truly ask with all my heart for your forgiveness." John remained silent for a long time. He knew how things were built, that time demands its lessons one way or another. Finally, he looked at her and smiled gently, reflecting on the years past with the wisdom of someone who had seen many battles and beginnings. "It's already done," he replied. Then, their future began to be rewritten, no longer by a single vision, but by both parties who began to understand the true meaning of creating human value from the simple touch of life in the field. True change begins in moments of reflection, and Helena now found herself in the midst of a wave of understanding that had invaded her life with her contact with John. The shock of the encounter between the two, previously marked by arrogance and misunderstanding, began to transform into something much more powerful, a true lesson on human value and the importance of seeing beyond the surface. As they spent more time together, the encounters that were once forced and cold became deep conversations. With each exchange, with each new act of kindness from John, Helena felt her certainties being challenged. Her entire life, built on financial success, luxury, and the power acquired through her high social position, began to feel empty compared to the way of life of the man she had previously scorned. If the old Helena looked at herself in the mirror, she would no longer recognize who she had become. It was fascinating to observe the transformation that was occurring, almost as if she had shed heavy layers that covered her. Helena began to understand more and more what it truly meant to fight daily like people like John. Her life of wealth and superficiality had shown a parallel world to those who, at the base of the economic pyramid, strive with dignity to reap the fruits of their labor. She began to realize that nature did not impose itself simply as she always imagined, that her dilemmas in managing a wealth empire were much more connected to the same dilemmas faced by those who worked the land with their own hands. She no longer saw herself just as a woman of status and money. Now she started to see the struggle for survival in the field with different eyes. The roots of what made her rich no longer revolved solely around dollar signs. She understood that the true value of wealth was not only measured by the goods it provided, but by the connections made between human beings along the way. Helena approached John in a way he had never imagined possible. She sought him out not just out of a desperate need for more information, but from a genuine desire to learn. He was there, present, not just to teach about the field or agriculture, but to show how he lived, respected life, and understood the true legacy of his existence. As she accompanied him through the land he tended, Helena realized that the field was not just a piece of land to be cultivated, but a direct link between life, daily decisions, and the future of the next generations. Seeing John care for the crops as if each product was precious, she understood that people's possessions do not belong solely to them. They owe the world a greater commitment. Helena could indeed learn from him about innovative agricultural methods, techniques to strengthen crop resilience, and, perhaps most importantly, about how to create authentic bonds between human beings. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type juice if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. He smiled gently, perhaps feeling the weight of responsibility. That man, who had always dedicated himself to his land with immense love, was about to open his heart in an unexpected way. "Helena," John said softly, "you already know how I cultivate the land, how I make things grow around me. But there's something else you don't know about me, and about my legacy." Helena, though surprised, looked at him with curiosity. Her thoughts quickly began to question what he meant. Perhaps it was about the farm's future, something he was still planning, or some secret from the past that she had never imagined. "I have a son," John continued. "Peter. He is, in fact, the man who will carry on everything I've built here." The surprise was greater than she expected. Throughout their time together, Helena had no idea who John's family really was. And at that moment, everything seemed to become even more intriguing. It was as if John's story extended beyond the boundaries of a small rural property, of a simple farm. "Peter is more than the heir to my possessions. He represents who I have been in life. If you understand me, he is my reflection. But he will also have the role of propelling our family into a better future." The sincere look in John's eyes as he spoke about Peter was full of pride. He was letting on not only the pride of a father, but the awareness that what he had accomplished over the years was not something material. It was a legacy of values, humility, dedication to work, and love for the land. And at the exact moment when Helena processed this, she was finally introduced to Peter. The young man, with a keen and calm look, smiled when he met the woman who had once despised his father so much. She felt a new energy in the room, something that could not be translated into words, but touched her deeply. "Helena, I don't know if you've heard of me, but my father has always been the greatest example for me. It's not about what he has or what he owns. He has always been a great man for other reasons. When you did what you did at the airport, there was pain. But something else came from that, and I'm here now, so we can move forward." Young Peter, instead of accusations, showed maturity. He saw that there was no need to dispute what was no longer a matter of class, but of humanity. They were now facing an understanding that went far beyond what any business or financial division could justify. In the following days, John made a point of giving them more than just the tradition of his property. He shared with Helena and Peter a way of thinking deeply about what it means to leave a legacy. It's not about piling up wealth, but transforming the lives of the people around you. He knew that the true value of his journey was not only in material goods, but in how he could change the people who were now much more connected to his reality. As the story unfolded, Helena began to realize the importance of the choices she had made throughout her life. Her ambitions were no longer limited to material matters. She understood that the most precious value was in the trust and partnership that emerged from that simple but deep piece of land. Beside John and Peter, she now saw what it meant to be part of something genuine, something more than money, power, and status. The days of arrogance and social distancing were left behind. The emotions Helena now felt were not tied to the money she could earn, but to the opportunity to learn the true measure of human value. In a world where appearances and the power of big names still impose themselves with great force, Helena's journey alongside John showed her that the most important legacy does not come from material wealth or dominance over others. It is built on the choices we make daily. The real meaning of someone's life is not what they leave as financial inheritance, but what they teach others about respect, dignity, and how each action, no matter how small, can profoundly and lastingly change the future. In the end, Helena was grateful to have learned the hard way that true value is not found in accumulated wealth, but in the human connections we leave for future generations. And as she thought while looking at the farm from a distance, her life now extended beyond the materialistic pursuit. She was finally understanding the real meaning of legacy. And for the first time, she knew that her future, along with John's and Peter's, would be built on the foundations of this new understanding. Life, she thought, is much more than what we do for ourselves. It is about the lives we touch along the way and the deep marks we leave on others. Alongside people like John and his family, Helena was beginning to learn that the greatest legacy one can leave is to have been a source of growth and learning for those around us. But the understanding of these values and exchanges was not just theoretical. Soon, it would reflect practically. After some deeply challenging conversations, where she confronted her own baggage of prejudices and judgments, Helena began to want much more than just to learn. She wanted to become an active partner of John's. At first, John was reticent. He did not fully understand where this sudden change in her had come from. After all, the woman who had been a source of insults was the same woman, a short time later, offering the necessary support to carry out improvements on John's farm, with advanced ideas on improvements that could expand his crops. But it wasn't just this that deeply touched John. It was Helena's sincere desire to go beyond her own experiences. In practice, Helena was now seeking something that transcended her former position, and it was this desire that led the two to form a transformative partnership. She offered not just financial investments, as she was used to doing at other times in her life, but something she never imagined she would need: time dedicated to improving John's business. It wasn't just the agricultural system that benefited, but a relationship of mutual respect and genuine learning. Beside John, she began to understand aspects of the rural world that the corporate world couldn't teach. The farmer's generosity, the intimate bond with the land, and the sustainable way of dealing with nature. All of this was far more valuable than any monetary exchange she had ever made in her life. And in this process, it wasn't just the field that became part of Helena's story. She herself, who previously saw herself as an isolated and distant figure, began to form alliances, a strategic partnership between two completely different realities. But in the union of these two worlds that seemed irreconcilable, the rural and the urban, the poor and the rich, something truly grand was born. As improbable as it seemed that a high-class socialite could learn something in the field, the very essence of rural work began to show her that true leadership was not about commanding through pressure, but by example and mutual trust. Like any great leader, John didn't ask others to do what he himself wasn't capable of doing. Every morning of work on the farm, every new cultivation concept, every theory applied in the crops, Helena was impressed with John's humble wisdom. He was being a mentor in his own way, not just guiding others in their work, but also giving them autonomy. And that was exactly what she needed to learn. Helena learned the art of solving complex problems in simple ways. She knew deep down that her future depended on what she would truly build with that new journey, but in a true and lasting way, not just based on financial tactics, but also on ethical and respectful work. During the long days of working together, she realized that this coexistence meant more than money. It meant leaving a respectable and well-founded legacy, something to inherit and preserve for generations, a way to prosper on a sustainable basis. Helena now seemed more determined than ever. As much as the pride and arrogance of her high class had been tested and practically destroyed in the midst of all these exchanges, she knew she was richer now than ever before. Her soul now connected with the soil, with ancestral wisdom, with the leadership that could bring fruit for future generations. And most importantly of all, through this partnership with John, she began to feel a type of freedom that money had never been able to offer. True freedom, an authentic understanding of the deeper elements of life and the human relationship that creates networks for everyone's future. The past was no longer a burden. It now intertwined with new challenges, new goals, and new relationships built with respect. The days that followed forever changed Helena's vision of her life and her choices. As the weeks passed and she dedicated herself more and more to working on John's farm, something magical and unexpected happened. The relationship between the two, which had started with so much friction and distrust, was now built on a foundation of genuine respect and mutual understanding. Both learned valuable lessons, he about the dynamics of the corporate world, and Helena about the greatness of the values that only a simple life can teach. But the true impact of the change in Helena's life was yet to come. After so many lessons in humility and value enrichment, something else, even deeper, was about to happen. One morning, as she passed through John's property once again, he called her for an important conversation. Something in his eyes, usually calm and serene, seemed a bit different. It was as if a secret he had been keeping for years was finally about to be revealed. Do you think Helena was truly able to change her view of others and her own values? Or was the need to rebuild what motivated her to act? Rate this story from 0 to 10. How would you rate it? Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to follow all our stories. And check out more exciting stories by clicking here on the end screen.